Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to the 15th anniversary Promising Pathways Conference. We are so excited to be here with you and to see you all here. My name is Joanna Solopska-Galeri. I'm the co-chair of the conference, along with Dr. Anne Marie Connor and our amazing planning committee. We are just so thrilled to have you here. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you learn a lot. I hope you make some new friends. And I hope you make some really great connections. This event would not have been possible without the incredibly hard work and devotion of our Promising Pathways Planning Committee, whose names you saw on the monitor behind me. Many of them have been a part of this event since the start, since 2007. So very, very grateful for their efforts. Can I just ask really quickly if the committee members could just stand up real quick and we can give you a thank you, a proper thank you. Thank you so much. We would also like to thank our wonderful FGCU students, both graduate and undergraduate. And you see them today wearing their light blue shirts. They're helping you find your way, hopefully, and give you the information you need so you can have a wonderful conference. And also assisting our vendors and our speakers as well. And they represent the future of our mental and physical health professions. And we are very proud that they are Eagles. We're also here today because of the generosity of our community sponsors and supporters, the ones that you also saw listed on the heading behind me. A great many individuals and organizations have contributed to making this event possible today, and they include the Marieb College of Health and Human Services, the Seidler Lecture Series, the College of Arts and Sciences, the Lemieux family, and the Community Autism Network at FGCU, which is an interdisciplinary group of FGCU faculty, students, and autistic individuals committed to working together to translate autism best practices into community support, inclusive spaces, and events for and with our autism community. We would also like to thank the leadership at FGCU. President Martin, Dean Felton, Dean Lindsay, thank you so much for your support in helping our faculty and students create an inclusive and welcoming environment for the autism community through our programs, including the Community Autism Network and the Soaring Eagles Academy. We are just so grateful this year as well for Professor Temple Grandin, who's made the journey to be with us today in person from her home in Colorado. I cannot overstate how electric this audience is today to hear you speak, to hear your words, and to learn from you. You were here for our 5th anniversary event in 2012. My, how time flies. And we thank you for continuing to support our event. I would now like to introduce the president of Florida Gulf Coast University, Dr. Mike Martin.
I'm not the feature here, I'm going to move quickly, but welcome to the campus of FGCU, your campus. I want you to fully appreciate the fact that this is the community's place, and it's so nice to be back together in the community space. We're really pleased to have you here. So please welcome. And to all of our folks who toiled to get this up and running, and to all of those of you participating, thank you very much. It's a really a unique privilege, I mean it. When you come to know Joanna and Anne Marie, you know that you have relentless leaders who will not allow others not to be relentless with them. And that's how we get here today. Let me tell you just a couple things about FGCU that I hope will help set the context for why we're so pleased to have you here. We're called a regional comprehensive university. Now, we want to play on a national and international stage, but we never forget, as a regional comprehensive university, that we have a fundamental responsibility to Southwest Florida, to be the convener of these sorts of discussions and to touch people's lives. And in comprehensive, we want to make sure that along with teaching undergraduates and graduates and doing scholarship, we engage our community and they engage us. So we never want to forget the definition of a regional comprehensive institution, because I believe they transform lives, and in the process, they transform the region. You may know that we are funded in part by a formula that has 10 criteria in it that we pursue relentlessly as well. But for me, at the end of the day, there's only one criteria, and that's this. When every citizen of Southwest Florida has a reason to be glad FGCU is here on a personal level. And that's why these sorts of events are, for me, the playing out of the fundamental purpose of why we're here. That this is to change lives and to give every individual that we touch a chance to be all they can become, wherever they are and whatever they do. We are a value added. I always tell my colleagues who are in somewhat more elite universities, we're a ladder, not a filter. We give people a chance to climb. And that's part of also what the culture of this place is and why so many of us enjoy coming to work here every day, because you get to see it happen. And finally, let me say, welcome, Temple. I became familiar with Temple when I was chancellor of the Colorado State System. And I guarantee you, you'll be glad she's here, and you'll be glad you're here with her. A remarkable, remarkable professional, a remarkable, remarkable member of the CSU faculty, and put the institution on the map about as much, well, much more so than the football team, incidentally, Temple. I guarantee you that. But in so many ways for all the right reasons. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for 15 years of participation. Let's hope this is the beginning of 15 more, and that at each one we make some real progress in advancing the lives of those with autism, and in the process, changing this community. Much appreciated. Go Eagles.
Thank you so much, President Martin, for that warm, warm welcome to all of us. If I could just ask everyone, try and silence your phones, please. And now I'd like to introduce the Dean of the College of Health Professions, Marieb College, Health and Professional, Professor Sean Felton. Thank you. Thanks.
No issues. I was interviewing someone for a position yesterday, and they still had us from the old Health Professions and Social Work, Marieb. And I just joked with the person. I was like, it's the Marieb College of Health and Human Services. And that goes back to great support to Dr. Elaine Nickplom Marieb, no longer with us. But she believed in us, as Mike talked about, much like all of you in this room before believing in this conference, and was willing to support. And I just want to recognize Representative Persons Mollica right here, and her husband David. They've been long time. You can stand up, please. Thank you for all that you do. Longtime supporters of the Promising Pathways Conference, and excited to be here as well. So I want to get to the point with Temple. This is much more exciting to hear than me speaking anytime, but I'm proud of our Community Autism Network that has really progressed over the last 18 months with a lot of great support, and those supporters are setting in here today. And I agree with President Martin. I see Anne Marie coming. I got to get braced, but she's tenacious, and it's a good piece because we wake up each day. What I live by is doing things right, and this is what's right for our community. And because of the great leadership related to that area, we're doing some great things. Often I see around here related to healthcare, related to care for autism, or care for mental health, care for other areas, we have been a desert of care for many, many years. And we won't build Rome overnight, but through items like this, through conferences like this, through work of the Community Autism Network, we're going to make a little progress each day. So I just want to thank everyone for being here. It's a beautiful day, and I'll turn it back over to Jana, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I have no more to say except Professor Temple Grandin.
Well, it's great to be here today. Now we just have to hope my slides work. Okay, good. That is good. And most of you know that when I was a little kid, I had no speech until age 4. And what I want to do is get these kids out doing things. Get them out doing things. See, and one of the problems that we've got with autism is you're going from Elon Musk. How many people knew Elon Musk is autistic? Yeah. So that's one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum, maybe they have epilepsy, very severe things, they can't dress themselves. And it's got the same name. It doesn't really make very much sense. And that's my book, The Outdoor Scientist. Get kids out doing things. Get them off the tech. You know, the video game industry doesn't like me very much. They canceled an online conference due to bandwidth issues, which I think is complete rubbish. And, you know, the thing is, if kids were playing video games and getting fantastic jobs in that industry, I would not be bashing it. But that is not what's happening. I see there's 2 ways that the fully verbal can go. To the basement or the bedroom and play video games, or get out and have a life. No, we got to get kids out doing things. That's why I did this book right here. There's a 3-year-old discovering how the water flows off the roof at our building. You know, and this is just an example of where you can teach. There's Dad on the other side there facilitating it. It's the most simple, mundane things. You can use it for teaching about how the natural world works. Now, the thing I want to ask you is what would happen to some of the top innovators that we've had in the past if they were a kid today? Some of them would be in an autism program. Yeah, where would they go? This is what I want to ask. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is I spent 25 years in heavy construction. I'll be getting into how I sold jobs. I would sell a job, design a job, supervise its construction, start it up. I worked with all kinds of skilled tradespeople that owned big shops, had private jets, and they would have been on the autism spectrum. Barely graduated from high school. Also can tell you right now, never did learn how to do algebra. I don't know how to do algebra. And I'm seeing that, you know, keeping people out of good careers. I just went and visited a new shop in Colorado, and the guy there said I had a choice between algebra or business math. Business math's a lot more important. So you can actually run your shop, the financial side of it. I have grandparents that come up to me all the time, and they discover they're on the autism spectrum when the kids are diagnosed. This happens all the time. And they've had good careers in many different things, engineering, pharmacy, building fences, a lot of good things. Now, where the diagnosis helps them is with their relationships. But on the fully verbal end of the spectrum, I'm seeing it holding too many people back. There's too much in the autism box. I'm going to bust you out of that, and I'm going to show you there's a big world of industry out there. And we've got some very serious problems with losing skills. Very serious problems. Like, we don't make the state-of-the-art electronic chip-making machine. You know, like electronic chips. The physics work for that was done here. It comes from Holland. And that goes back to, they didn't take their skilled trades out. We stick our nose up at it. I worked with talented people that had multiple patents. One of them has a corporate jet, barely graduated from high school. I'm serious. I've been on that jet. I call this guy Willy Wonka in stainless steel. Now, Willy made me sign an NDA, so I can't tell you where the jet went. And since he's not publicly, you know, I have to cover it up. Well, it's a $1 jillion factory, 20 or more patents. This is what makes me just go nuts, is I go back and forth between the worlds. And then you have much more severe autism. They're not going to be running a factory. It's just that simple. All right, this is one of my most important slides, the different kinds of minds. I'm what's called an object visualizer. Can't do algebra. I managed to get out of it. Now, I got this little drawing from this little girl that's running around on a scooter because she broke her leg, 9 years old. This is really good. This cow is in perspective. My mother always advanced my ability in art. expanding it, because I would draw the same horse head over and over again. You want to take that thing that the kid's good at and expand it. That's what you want to do. Draw the whole horse. Draw where you ride it to. Make an associative link back to it. Now, all of the visual thinkers like me that owned big shops, they couldn't do algebra, but they were building great big factories. Business math, a lot more important. Then you have your pattern thinker, spatial visualizer. They run Silicon Valley. They are the pattern, the mathematical thinkers. And there's scientific research that shows that these different kinds of thinking exist. In fact, Betsy Lerner and I have got a new book that's coming out. You can pre-order on Barnes & Noble or on Amazon. Just go in Visual Thinking, Temple Grandin. You got to put my name in there too. Otherwise, it brings up a whole bunch of other stuff. Visual Thinking, Temple Grandin. And some of the science that backs up what I'm saying here is in my book, The Autistic Brain. But these different kinds of thinking are scientifically validated. And some people can be mixtures. Now, the first step, I actually show these same slides to big corporations like S&P, IBM, Dell Computer, big companies. And I said the first thing is you have to realize that different kinds of thinking exists. When I did my work on cattle handling in my 20s, I thought everybody was a visual thinker. I didn't even know that verbal thinking existed. And then you have the verbal thinker who thinks in words. And, and these different kinds of thinking can have complementary skills. Because Betsy, my co-author, she's a verbal thinker. I write the rough draft, boy, does she know how to reorganize it. That's an example of the different kinds of thinking working together. Then you've got some people that have dyslexia, and they're auditory thinkers. They learn best with their ears. And we need to be taking what the kid is good at. Pounding away on algebra with me is ridiculous. And I'm seeing that keeping a kid out of skilled trades class, that's stupid. You don't need algebra for skilled trades. You need old-fashioned sixth grade arithmetic, the way it used to be taught. I looked up first, second, and third grade Common Core, and I'm going, you gotta be kidding. But these different kinds of thinking actually do exist. Verbal thinkers are top-down. You might be saying they overgeneralize. Well, we gotta have an inclusive environment. But there's no detail on how you do it. Visual thinkers and math thinkers are bottom-up. You take specific examples and you put them into categories. Okay, I was just talking to a dad about learning the value of money. Well, I got 50 cents a week for allowance in the 50s. 50 cents was like $5 today. And I could buy 5 comic books or 10 candy bars. And one of my favorite toys was a table hockey set. And it was given to me for Christmas. And I saw that in the window of a store with a price tag on it. That was $20. That was a whole year's worth of allowance. So then I'm understanding there's things that 50 cents can buy, and there's things that a $20 bill could buy. You see, making the money not abstract with specific examples of specific things you could buy. You see, that's bottom-up thinking. That's the same way that computers think. Now, to make bottom-up thinking work, you got to put a lot of data into the database. That's why we got to get these kids out experiencing a lot of different things. Bottom-up thinking. Concepts are formed from specific examples, then you group them into categories. So when I was a little kid, this is exactly how you start training an artificial intelligence program. How did I figure out a cat wasn't a dog? Well, we mostly had big dogs in our neighborhood. So I could sort cat, dog, horse by size. And then a dachshund came into the neighborhood. I could no longer sort them by size. So I had to figure out other features. Barking, their smell, the shape of their nose. I had to figure out other features that a dachshund shared with other dogs. You see, that is a very simple bottom-up thinking. All right, let's look at one of the greatest achievements of my generation. I was a total NASA geek. I would have gone into aviation, but I couldn't do the math. But what I've learned in a lot of things, there's 2 sides of engineering. There's a visual thinking side and the mathematical side. The visual thinking side usually has a label like drafting technician or welder, but they are inventing things and designing it. Well, I got a chance to visit Cape Kennedy. That was really emotional for me. Now, the right stuff rides the rockets, but the special ed department builds the stuff. The person who was in charge of building this launch pad, and this is 4 years ago, this is recent, this is not something from 50 years ago, he had Tourette's syndrome. Well, that kind of brings up a lot of stuff about identity. For me, career is my identity. Having an interesting career has made life worthwhile. When I was bullied in school, friends through shared interests. Horses, model rockets, electronics. Brings up another thing. For students to get interested in a career, they got to be exposed to it. So it starts out with exposure first, then mentoring. I'll talk later on about the importance of mentors. Let's look at some mathematician specialists. Katherine Johnson, the famous mathematician. Her childhood math was moved ahead. Her math education was handled right. Hal Laning, messy office, he was probably on the spectrum. He did algebra for play. Not my kind of mind, definitely not. But his equations were essential for landing on the moon. So the primitive computer, that was in a 60-pound suitcase, basically, could land on the moon. And we got to thank Playtex. They made the spacesuit. It really is the Playtex living spacesuit. And the engineers used to fight with the head designer at Playtex, who used to be a TV repairman, probably didn't have an engineering degree. This is what I found. The visual thinking side usually doesn't have the engineering degree. I've done lots of engineering, but I always had to sign off livestock handling consultant. And I knew not to mess with roof trusses. There were some things like that where they were licensing requirements, but not cattle handling facilities. And I worked with skilled people that owned big shops that definitely were on the spectrum. Stutterers, dyslexic, and they were saved by a single welding class in high school. They were not prevented from taking welding because they didn't pass algebra. That's really stupid. All right, let's look at how craftsmanship makes the Mars rover cameras work. You can see they're not very big. There's a pocket knife next to them. Look at all the hand-done wiring on that. Somebody built those on a workbench. That's the more visual, skilled trades side of engineering. And that doesn't get the credit. And they've taken some beautiful pictures. You see, the mathematicians got the rover there. Skilled trades built it. And if you look at the selfies of the Mars rover and the Chinese Mars rover, there's hand-done wiring all over them. That doesn't get enough credit. Now, my grandfather was a co-inventor of autopilot for airplanes. And he worked with a guy that was probably autistic, who came up with this really goofy idea for 3 little coils that everybody in aviation thought was stupid. But they tinkered with this in a loft. My grandfather, MIT-trained mathematical engineer, working with a kind of weird guy who came up with a goofy idea. You see, that's an example of complementary skills. And that was in every warplane during World War II. Now, unfortunately, the ripoff was in every warplane. They weren't very good business people. What would happen to Michelangelo the other day? Dropped out of school at age 12? Dirty little brat. But he was going into churches and seeing great art that was being commissioned. And he grew up with stone cutting tools. See, that's the exposure. And then later on, mentoring. When some of the professional artists started seeing his work. Steve Jobs, bullied in school, he's probably on the spectrum. You take something like the iPhone. Steve Jobs was not a programmer. He was an artist. That's why the iPhone's easy to use. The mathematicians had to make that phone work. Einstein would land in a special ed class today. No speech until age 3. Now you can argue about whether or not he's autistic, but a kid with delayed speech is going to end up in an autism class. They also had creative hobbies. Thomas Edison, high school dropout, learned how to work. This is another big problem I'm seeing. Too many parents overprotective, kids aren't learning how to work. We need to have a slow transition from the world of school to the world of work, starting with chores at home, 11 years old, things like church volunteer jobs, instant and legal, real jobs. We need to be doing them. People are too stuck in the autism box. I've been out to Silicon Valley to the big tech companies. Half those programmers are on the spectrum. Yeah, this is the thing that makes me kind of want to pull my hair out, is I go back and forth between the autism world and business and industrial world. Real problem. Okay, people ask me all the time if I could do one thing. What would I do to the schools? I'm going to put all these classes back in. We should have never taken them out. Well, I got exposed to musical instruments, but I couldn't figure out how to play the little recorder flute. But at least I got exposed to it. Theater, I made costumes for the school play. You've got to get kids exposed to this stuff, and that needs to start in grade school, middle school. I'm not suggesting welding in grade school. But when I was in elementary school, I took art, wood shop, and and sewing. I really, really liked those jobs. Cooking, I hated. But taking this stuff out was the worst thing they ever did, because all of these classes make exposure to things that can turn into careers. Now, how do you figure out what kind of thinker a kid is? Okay, now I see artwork like this from a 9-year-old. You know, just draws it out freehand. She penciled it first and then put the marker on it. I'm going, that's a visual thinker right there. Now, the things that go together are art, photography, animals, and mechanics. Those three things go together. Art, animals, photography, and mechanics. Now, your mathematical minds, they like to build things. Computer programming, music, math, chemistry, more mathematical things. Mathematical parts of engineering. But the thing is, you need the different kinds of minds. Because you take a degreed engineer right out of college, the contractors are going to just rip them off. It's going to be a mess. And the verbal thinkers who are autistic often love facts. So let's look at some of the jobs for these people. My kind of mind, graphic art, setting up audiovisual stuff in big convention centers, mechanics, skilled trades. You see, this is all the visual part of engineering. I call it the clever engineering department. Think packaging equipment. The verbal thinkers, some of them that are on the spectrum, will be very good at specialized retail. They'd know every car on the lot. They'd know every phone, its good points, its bad points, specialized retail. Yeah, we want to be, there's been a lot of concern right now about identity, whether it's person with autism or it's autistic. I was putting autistic on stuff a long time ago. Some people on the spectrum would rather have it be autistic. But I really get to thinking, what's my identity? It's career first. Having an interesting career where I can do things that, do work to improve the cattle industry. That's something worthwhile. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby compared to other scientists. Yeah, that's another reason for keeping these classes. Now, how did I learn to sell jobs? When I was in high school, I had a little sign painting business. You see, and the skills I learned on that went right over into selling cattle handling facilities. I learned to sell my work rather than myself. But you don't want to show your work to the HR department. They're not going to care about it. You got to show it to the engineers. And I carried my portfolio around. You never know where someone can open the door. There's a scene in the HBO movie where I get the editor's card. And I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would help my career. I had decent writing skills, even though I got kicked out of ninth grade for fighting because a girl called me a weirdo. I had good skills. Okay, there's one of my drawings, one of my jobs back in the 70s. I showed people my drawings. Now that's the drawing that I sent to Cargill to sell them on designing the front end of every Cargill plant in North America. And you can look up beef plant video tour with Temple Grandin, and you can see a lot of stuff I've designed. We're not going to show that now. Now, why did I write on that you have to touch to perceive? I watched the industry go from hand drafting to computers. And the people who had never built anything or never drew by hand made strange mistakes on drawings. Yeah, we need to be doing hands-on things. But I sent that to the head of Cargill. 30-second wow. That was one of the pictures that went with it, simply showing the work. And that's a replica of one of my facilities that they made for the movie. I love the fact they duplicated all my projects. A geek side of me really, really liked it. And there's my brochure. 70s and 80s, color printing was too expensive. But I learned to always have my portfolio with me. Now, a lot of parents are so much in the autism box, they say the kid's good at art. And I say, well, show it to me. And they don't think to have it on their phone. I'll give you another example of stuck in the autism box. So the parents that got an 8-year-old brilliant in math, both parents are programmers. They never thought to teach their kid programming. That's how much they got stuck in the autism box. Then I go out to Silicon Valley and I see all kinds of people out there that I know are on the spectrum. There's another one of the pictures that got sent to the head of Cargill. And there's a black and white picture of one of my original projects. Who builds big food processing plants? This is where we're losing skills. Take a great big pork plant, big beef plant, big chicken plant. Visual thinkers with titles like draftsman and welder do all of the highly specialized mechanical equipment. A lot of that doesn't come from the degreed engineers. It comes from people that can visualize how to make the machinery. I call it the clever engineering department. And a lot of these kids are getting screened out by algebra requirements. The math thinkers on a large poultry plant, they do the boilers and refrigeration, make sure the roof isn't going to collapse. You see, you need the whole team. But right now, if you want a poultry processing plant, you're going to have to bring it over here from Holland in 100 shipping containers. You see, there's a relationship here between that kid in the basement playing video games and what's going on here in industry. We got a gigantic shortage of things like electricians and mechanics. 20% of the people I worked with on large projects are things like Tyson plants, Cargill, owned metal fabrication companies. They were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. And I'm saying this seriously. Multiple patents. Designing and building complicated equipment, installing it in major corporations. They're all retiring. They're retiring. They're not getting replaced. Okay, in 2019, just before COVID hit, I had kind of a wake-up call. I went to this pork processing plant and another brand new pork processing plant. This is brand new, a poultry plant, the Steve Jobs Theater. And I discovered that every piece of equipment on that floor came from a high-wage country, most of it from Holland, because they've kept their skilled trades. And I'm going, this is really serious. The Steve Jobs Theater, structural glass walls, they're from Germany and Italy. Germany and Italy. Then you go out to the chicken farm and they have this machine that looks like a big combine for picking up the chickens. It's called the Apollo. You can look up Apollo chicken harvester online. It's from Italy. Better take this stuff seriously. And the carbon fiber roof is from Dubai. So I stood in the middle of this screaming, we don't make it anymore. Then we have the Dutch state-of-the-art electronic chip-making machine that we also don't make. Here's the parachute landing on Mars. She's taking a selfie of herself while she's landing. That fabric's from the UK, woven on high-tech European looms. Now, we made the parachute here, but the fabric is from Europe. All right, let's give you some tips out in the workplace. If I was a computer, I'm an Intel 286. If but I got a couple of warehouses full of servers for memory. I have no working memory. Now, design jobs and programming jobs don't load working memory. Don't shove me into the McDonald's takeout window. That's not going to work. Or a chaotic store during the Christmas holidays. Not going to work. The other thing is, any task that involves a sequence, I need a checklist. Like closing out a cash drawer, a checklist. But you can go crazy. I was getting on the plane last night, and they had a 15-item checklist for running an apron drive jet bridge. I'm going, really? One of the things on there is turning the light on. Okay, that should have been chunked. Whoever wrote that didn't look at how pilot's checklist makes chunks, like pre-taxi, pre-takeoff. You might only have 5 to 7 things in each chunk. No, that was ridiculous. Nobody's going to read that. But what you need is a key word to trigger what the next step is. Pilot's checklist. Well, I can tell you what United Airlines did to prevent aircraft damage. They have a big sign on theirs. They go, we slowed these down. And that's got some guy's name on it. Because they got sick of people damaging the plane with a jet bridge. Okay, that was their approach, engineering approach. We slow the thing down so it just doesn't go so fast. Okay, there's different ways you can approach engineering. But that was an example of checklist done wrong. It's just totally ridiculous. But, you know, the kind of jobs that require a lot of working memory, I'm not going to be good at. Design jobs, programming jobs, building things, that doesn't require working memory. The other thing we got to be doing with these teenagers and young adults is stretching. Just outside the comfort zone with choices. We got to limit the video game playing. They're not getting great jobs. That's not happening. If they were getting great jobs in that industry, I wouldn't criticize it. And vagueness doesn't work. Let's say they're working in a store. Don't just say, tidy up the shelves, that's too vague. You say, I want each kind of shampoo lined up with the correct price tag on the front of the shelf. Okay, that's giving a specific instruction. The other big problem I'm seeing is a lot of work people, and this is overgeneralization with verbal, don't differentiate between where stocking shelves is a suitable career for some clients, and others it's a training job. For somebody like me, it would be a training job. What's the ultimate goal of education? Where is a student 10 years after high school? I can think of places I don't want them. That's what we need to be looking at. 10 years later, I already had my master's degree, and I was doing those DipFat projects. They're showing the movie. Another thing that's helped me on anxiety is hard exercise every single night. That's really helped. Work experience. This is where we're falling down. This is work experience I had. We need to get chores for little kids, things like church volunteer jobs at age 11, where they learn how to work for somebody outside the home on a schedule. When I was 13 years old, mother got me a little sewing job. She just set it up in the neighborhood. You don't always have to go to Voc Rehab. Let's get a lot more creative. Okay, I noticed on here Eventbrite. Well, that's a door. Eventbrite's a big company. They do all kinds of stuff. You see, I'm already thinking about it. Here's a connection right there. I saw it. You didn't even think about how to use it. And then when I was 15, I was cleaning horse stalls. I took care of the horse barn. 9 stalls every day. Then I had a chance to go to my aunt's ranch, and I was afraid to go. That's how I got interested in the cattle industry, because I went to my aunt's ranch. If I hadn't gone to my aunt's ranch, I would not be in the cattle industry. It's just that simple. Roofing, that's probably illegal today. But the other thing I did was I had a sign painting job in high school. And I was selling signs. You see, this is learning the entrepreneur. And the first sign I made was for a hair salon. And I had to make a sign they'd want. And then when I was in college, I was doing internships, career-relevant internships. My mother helped set up some of them. So that's a lot of work experience by the time I graduated from college. Back doors into jobs. Half of all jobs are back door. People just aren't seeing it. And that's why that scene where I get the editor's card is so important. I saw that back door, and then I produced a good article. Elementary school life skills training. In my neighborhood, when kids were like 7, they had to be party hosts and hostesses when the parents had a party. Greet the guests, take their coats, selling candy for charity, shopping. Already talked about that. You've got to make money concrete. Different amounts of money buy different things. That's how you make money not abstract. But these are things that just fit these things. And then there's another thing I call teachable moments. So we're at the dining room table, and I put my fingers in the mashed potatoes. Well, they didn't scream no. She said, use the fork. You give the instruction instead of saying no. Friends through shared interests. The bullies didn't do horses or model rockets or electronics. Those were places I had friends through shared interests. Can't emphasize that enough. And another thing I did in high school is I fixed up this ugly shed and I made it nice. I put that white trim on there. I figured that out. I painted that sign that's on the side of the shed with the name of my school on it. I made it in a way that they would like. I was maybe 18 when I did that, all by myself. Got the before and after on the shed. But this is learning valuable work skills. And then when I was getting my master's degree, I painted signs at the Arizona State Fair. That's me up there painting a stupid sign. So how did I get that job? I showed an old sign painter my portfolio. He put me to work. Now the other thing is I knew how to drive. I couldn't have done any of cattle stuff. I couldn't have done this if I hadn't learned to drive. We have got to make a major, major initiative on this. But it's going to take longer. When I learned to drive, my aunt's mailbox at the ranch was 3 miles away. So every day, up and back to that mailbox, 6 miles. We did 6 weeks of that before I touched traffic. We've got to move ahead doing it in totally safe places. Driver's ed chucks them into it too fast. Got to learn driving. I want to really push on that. But we got to go into it slowly but steadily. Because you got to get the driving into motor memory before you do traffic. That solves the multitasking problem. And there's my sign painting truck. Driving. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. Slow transition from school to work. You know, like jobs on a schedule outside the home at 11 and 12. Learning shopping. I'm seeing too many parents that baby their kid. They're not learning shopping. They've gotten so much into the mindset of autism. I'm seeing 16-year-olds, 12-year-olds that have never gone shopping. My mind works in specific examples. So I'm seeing this 12-year-old right now. We were at some airport somewhere. And they came up and they introduced ourselves. We were in the gate room. Found out this girl had never shopped, fully verbal. And I gave her $5. And I said, go in that newsstand and buy something. This was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. And she went and bought a drink. She brought me back the change. First time she'd ever shopped. This is ridiculous. And that was like 4 years ago. That wasn't something from 50 years ago. And learn how to keep real jobs before they graduate from high school, especially on the fully verbal end of things. And another, let's talk about mentors. There was my mother, always pushing me, learning drawing. Let's get some professional art lessons for this little girl, because this is really good. Yeah, let's get some professional art lessons. Now, I get a lot of art where I wouldn't be putting it up here showing it because it was not really good. But that's, you see the cows in perspective. Yeah, let's get art lessons for her. So I had a great 3rd grade teacher. I had a wonderful science teacher as I was goofing off at school. And Mr. Carlock showed me how learning, how studying can be a pathway to a goal. Then there was Jim the contractor, another important mentor. He had a little tiny construction company. He was a former Marine Corps captain, and he seeked me out to design jobs for him. He also showed me how to set up a business. Really important. I had no idea how to do that. Another very important mentor. Finding mentors. My mother taught me to read at age 8. I couldn't read. They were using the Dick and Jane books, totally boring. Well, I can't believe some of the nonsense, complicated nonsense they got online for teaching phonics. And then I had a little light bulb moment, and I go, I already knew my ABC song. And I realized the ABC song has half the sounds. A, B, C, D, I mean, go through it. You've got half the sounds. So she got a book worth reading. She pinned the alphabet up on the wall and had me memorize the sounds, like A and or long and short A. And we would read when I got home from school, and I very quickly went from no reading to sixth grade level reading. That's how she taught me, and we did all the reading out loud. It wasn't that hard. Well, some of that stuff that we got now is just ridiculous. And I already talked about the other mentors. Now let's talk about some sensory issues. Highly variable. Highly, highly variable. I had problems with loud noise. Now, one of the ways they can help reduce this is give the kid control. He doesn't like the vacuum cleaner? Let the kid play with the vacuum cleaner and be turning it on and off where they control it. There was one kid terrified of the scoreboard buzzer. See, my mind thinks in specifics. Take him down to the gym when no one's there and play with a button. And he started tapping out tunes on the scoreboard buzzer. Give him control. Now, if you wear headphones all the time, your ear's going to get more sensitive. But give them to the kid so he has them with you. Always can have them with you, but then try not to wear them. And then there's some really awful places where you have maybe like some of these industrial strength bathrooms where the flushers are totally unpredictable. Maybe that's the place where you put them on. But you give the kid control. Give the kid some choices of clothing where there's control. And how about picky eating? Get them involved with food preparation so they can go play in it. We don't allow play in the dining room table, but in the kitchen you can go all around in it. And then I think it's fine to have a few things they hate. Raw egg white, that is throw-up department. Mother did not make me eat that. It's okay to have a few things they hate. Now, visual processing problems. Now, this is a subgroup. It's not everybody. If a kid's terrified of escalators, probably has a visual processing problem. And he may also have problems with seeing fluorescent lights flicker. He can also see some of the cheap LEDs flicker. And this is something that is in the it has to be fixed department. You have a kid having trouble with reading, ask him if they see the print jiggle on the page. Eye exam may be more or less normal. All right, here are some simple fixes. They might complain about the image breaking up. You may have some nonverbal clients that are fully, that can write independently, and they'll describe these kind of problems happening in their visual system. What if you're seeing like that? So you've got complicated circuits in the back of your brain that assemble the graphics file. Nobody really knows how they work. They just know that when you have strokes, you can break them in really weird ways. Like maybe have stop motion coffee pouring. Ask a kid if he ever sees the print jiggle on the page. Give you some ways to fix that. Try putting an incandescent lamp next to his desk, but he can't hardly buy those anymore. Get the desk over by the window. Find an LED that doesn't flicker. They're going to have to pick them out because some LEDs flicker, others don't. I know one that doesn't, Big Dutchman chicken house lights. They don't flicker. Another simple thing you can do is try printing the paper on different try printing the book on different pastel papers, like light blue, light lavender, light green. Let the kid pick the color. I don't know why it works. And someone might say to me, well, you need evidence-based. Well, you're talking about completely safe. It's colored paper. Use the pale colors. You can try it. It takes 15 minutes to try it. And there's nothing expensive about it. So you might as well go ahead and try it because I've seen it work. Severe sensory problems. Very difficult screening out background noise. Very, very difficult. Some kids will need breaks. Some kids cannot see and hear at the same time. I have some problems with that. All right, environmental enrichment is an effective treatment for autism. This is the title of a paper. You might want to look this paper up. It's evidence-based. And what you do in this for 15 minutes every day is stimulate two different senses, like maybe touch and smell. with simple things. It's an adjunct to other therapies. One of the senses is almost always smell or touch. You also need to keep changing the parastimuli. And you can find that paper, if you just type that title into Google, it will come right up. If you do it on Google Scholar, you can probably find the free copy. But this is something that might help on desensitizing sensory stuff. We need methods to treat that. Now, these are books, if you're working with kids like over 6, remain nonverbal. They remain nonverbal. These books are must-reads. These are people who type completely independently. They're totally nonverbal. Nobody's touching them or touching the thing they type on. Because I've seen queuing. Let's imagine this was a letterboard. I've seen people holding it. Well, that's queuing. Can't touch them or the thing they type on, whatever it is. These all type completely independently. And I met Tito in a library, and he was flapping all around, and I wanted to find something where his mom didn't know anything about it. So I reached into a stack of magazines and I found a picture of an astronaut on a horse in the desert with a spacesuit on. And I said, tell me about this picture. And he types, Apollo 11 on a horse, and then he gets up and runs around. There's no way that was cued. But these are books that, if you're working with adults that remain nonverbal, these books are must-reads, and they absolutely type completely independently. Attention-shifting slowness. You see, again, if I was a computer, attention-shifting slowness. Can't screen out background noise. When you got kind of chit-chat conversation, it moves too fast for me to follow it. And then if I'm in a restaurant and there's noise, I just start looking at the TVs because I can't follow it. It goes too fast. This is why you have multitasking issues. But there's lots of jobs that don't require fast processor speed. Okay, and on the driving to get around this, this is why you've got to get the operation of the car into motor memory, where it's like an autopilot before you do traffic. Okay, this is an old paper. If you actually dig the paper up by Ami Klin, they just talk about social reason for this. With eye tracking software, look at how many times the yellow line looks back and forth watching this movie. Yeah, that's attention shifting slowness. You won't find it in the paper. They just had a purely social explanation. Teaching young kids, slow down when you talk. When the grown-ups talked fast, it went to gibberish. Always encourage the kid to use their words. The other thing you got to do is give them time to respond. Imagine they're a phone with 1 bar of service. You've got to give them time to respond. Also, teachable moments. You might have 4 or 5 of those at the dining room table, where I would chew with my mouth open and Mother would explain to me, the other people think that's disgusting, and to chew with my mouth closed. Another big thing when I was little was teaching turn taking, how to wait and take turns at games. A lot of emphasis on that. And you give the instruction instead of screaming no. Really simple things. Now, it turns out I got a big visual thinking circuit. Yep, great big visual thinking circuit. You know what? That's an old slide. You know, that scanner sitting in the hospital right there. This is the old software. This scanner sitting in the hospital right now with the state-of-the-art software. Nobody's using it. And I think some of this is kind of the battle between neurology and the more verbal-based psychiatrists. Well, there's trashed out working memory right there. Okay, fear is the main emotion in autism. Like when puberty hit, I started having horrible problems with anxiety. It was all biology. You know, there's some people have anxiety that, you know, that something bad happens making the anxiety. But for me, it was all biology. And I was terrified of airplanes because in the senior in high school was an extremely scary emergency landing. I was also scared of public speaking. And one thing you do is you have good slides or you have a checklist with bullet points. That airplane right there was the scariest. When that thing put the gear down, I was sure the bottom was falling out. Now, what you got to do is make it interesting. So I got to fly in the cockpit of this plane that had a load of Holstein heifers on it going to Puerto Rico. So you got to take the thing that's scary, make it interesting. One mom went on the web pages of all the companies that made those automatic toilet flusher things. So the kid learned how they worked. That started making them interesting. Make something that's scary interesting. Fear, main emotion. Now that's been controlled since 1980 with a low dose of antidepressants. I discuss this in detail in my book, Thinking in Pictures. No, the medication saved me. Now, you got to make sure you don't give too high a dose. I just talked to a lady the other day, and they had her on too much Prozac, and she got agitation and insomnia. This is where the verbal thinkers get locked into the label. When you're using it for anxiety, it's a much lower dose. Sometimes half the normal starter dose. Too much, you're going to have problems. Even though Thinking in Pictures is 25 years old now, that information is still accurate. No, it saved me. And the terrible colitis attacks I had cleared up. No, it was strictly biology. And then I also found that deep pressure calmed me down. So I made my squeezing machine. I got the idea from a cattle squeeze chute. Some kids respond to deep pressure, others don't. See, this is where sensory stuff is variable. There's an OT working with pressure. There's been a lot of controversy these days about ABA. Well, there's some old-fashioned rigid ABA I think's really bad. Also, there were some teachers forcing kids into sensory overload. I also think smart kids, there's a point where you got to phase it out. You just phase it out. In fact, ABA was originally developed as a little kids program to get them ready for school. That's what it was originally developed for. And you got to show kids interesting things to get them interested in interesting things. And I got interested in this optical illusion rum because I saw it in a science movie. And Penrose tiling that Stephen Hawking uses for his math. And Stephen Hawking says, concentrate on those things. Your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. And he could do math in his head really well. Concentrate on the things your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. Now, I watched seated slalom skiing on the Paralympics. In other words, paralyzed from the waist down. Very cool. That's an example of what you could do. There's all kinds of interesting stuff. Maybe we need to get science and nature magazines in the high schools. To get kids business magazines in the high school. I got to bust you out of the autism box. Fractals, that's patterns, pretty patterns in math. You can go on Google Images and look that stuff up. Mathematical patterns in plants. All kinds of super interesting stuff. But a lot of people that are in psychology are verbal thinkers. So the first step is realizing how these kids think differently. And I'm going to leave that slide up there. That's some great free websites. And let's just open it up for questions right now until they tell me that I should stop. How much time do I have left? What? Okay, I'm going to pick somebody. Nobody has any. Okay, back there.
At what point did you start writing your own lists of doing activities, of going, and helping getting through those steps of doing the multitasks?
Well, the horse barn, once I learned to clean the stalls, I didn't need a checklist. But there's, some tasks, like the kind of tasks you're going to have problems with, things like closing out a cash drawer. Okay, that might be 4 or 5 steps. And I've been talking a lot about pilots' checklists and what they put on the Apron Drive passenger loading bridge. That was ridiculous. Because there's steps in that that's really important. And one of the things is don't leave a big gap for passengers to step in and don't hurt the airplane. So United solved that problem by slowing the thing down. But I was looking at that last night, getting on the plane, and I'm going, that's what you don't do. It's ridiculous. Because lots of times, a checklist is just a single key word. Like pilots have to set the flaps, so you have one word, flaps. You see, it's almost like a Google keyword. I said, who's going to read all that garbage learning how to work the jet bridge? It's ridiculous. Okay, right there. Well, do I still use the squeeze machine? It broke about 10 years ago. I never got around to fixing it. But it was something I used for maybe an hour a day.
Okay.
You know, it wasn't something like a kid playing a video game for hours and hours. I think some of these kids get into the video game because it helps relieve anxiety. I can remember getting the furious writing, typing. And I kind of think that would have been the 70s, you know, kind of video game. But the reason I'm so critical about this is because the outcome is so bad. They're not getting jobs. They're collecting a disability check to play video games all day. If they were getting fabulous video game company jobs, see companies like S&P. I talked to 1,000 people the other day on S&P virtually. IBM and Dell. These companies are making a point of reaching out to hire people that have autism and finding the right jobs. And a lot of the jobs they're going to have, like at S&P, is going to be data analytics. That's going to be more of the mathematical minds. But then a bank I talked to last summer has 2 autistic verbal type, the history lovers, selling high-end fancy financial products and doing really well at it. That's specialized retail.
Good morning, Dr. Grandin. Thank you for coming. I would like to know, during the COVID period, did you have difficulty understanding people's communication when they were wearing the masks? I found it very difficult.
Well, we did a lot of stuff on Zoom. They didn't have to wear a mask on Zoom. And I'll never forget the meeting we had 2 years ago on March 12th when they shut down the university. And we had spring break to get our stuff online. And I also learned that a decent online class is a lot more work than a live class. Doing a discussion board that's decent, ton of work. Ton of work. So the good thing about Zoom is nobody was wearing a mask. Now we've totally gotten rid of the masks. Well, yeah, sometimes I couldn't understand what they're saying because it's muffling the sound. And I've always had problems with hearing when there's background noise. Basically, functionally deaf when there's background noise. Always have been. And what I'll usually do at a busy dinner is talk to the person right beside me because I can talk to that person. Okay, right here.
Okay. So, what about people with autism that have fidgety?
They have what?
People with autism that have fidgety. I have fidgety.
They're just fidgety
Yeah.
because you move around too much?
I mean, yes.
One of the things that will help when you haven't moved around too much during this, one of the things that can help is hard exercise every day.
Oh,
Make
that's what
yourself
I
sweat.
That's what I do every day.
Yeah, go to the gym every day where you make yourself sweat. I found airport walking doesn't do it. You've got to do something that makes you really sweat. Then that is helpful on fidgeting.
Thank you. That's what I do.
Yeah,
I'll continue.
but I worked with all kinds of people that were doing drafting, laying out entire factories after a 1-semester community college course in drafting, and got into designing for a big company by showing one of his homework assignments to the engineering department of a large meat company. He was laying out entire factories. Now, this guy wasn't autistic, but he was laying out entire factories.
Thank you, Dr. Grandin. What strategies do you recommend for working with students with autism or even my own son when those fears and anxieties become
All right,
overwhelming?
How old is your son?
He's 19.
All right, you got them in here. That's good. All right. Choices. When I was 16 and I had my chance to go to my aunt's ranch, I was afraid to go. So mother gave me a choice. I could go for a week or I could go all summer. Not going wasn't one of the choices. Give some choices, but you got to get them out there.
So push them to the point of struggle.
Well, you give them some choices.
Thank you.
Get your
Thank you
job
so
at
much.
Target or Walmart. No, but the big problem I'm seeing is they're just not, I mean, the amount they're not learning to drive. Because all those granddads all learned to drive. Now, back in that generation, there may have been more safe places to learn it. Yeah, you need to get a job. But the other problem I've run into is where you had a job that was very successful with one boss. This was a job building fences. And then the guy got a new boss, yacked all the instructions out verbally, and the guy built some stuff wrong. And then got fired for that. He should have said, well, I just need to make a pilot's checklist of what, if he'd been allowed to write down, spend 5 minutes just writing down what he had to build, that wouldn't have happened. And that's a person I talked to a month ago. That's recent. See, my mind thinks in specific examples. But he lost a job at a fencing company because he didn't follow verbal instructions. You see, I cannot remember sequence. I have to write it down. And when I was designing big jobs, I would write down things like the budget they had. I used to classify jobs as, when we were remodeling things, Band-Aids, minor surgery, major surgery, and new construction. And minor surgery might be fix some gates and little things like that. Minor surgery, that would be a Band-Aid. Minor surgery might be replace the loading ramp. Major surgery is ripping out a big part of the plant and rebuilding it. New construction, of course, is new construction. But I would try to size up clients and see which one of those categories they fit in. Okay? No, mother was never trained as a teacher. She was an English major, and she was really into theater. And she'd work with the local kids on putting on plays at the school. But it was just like with the phonics stuff, it wasn't that hard. See, I think some of the stuff now, I can't believe the rubbish they've got online for phonics now. I mean, why are you making it so complicated? See, I think part of the problem is the verbal thinkers have totally taken over. But the thing is, when I'm working on my new book on visual thinking, I need Betsy. She's totally verbal, and it's been really interesting for me learning how Betsy thinks. Because concepts like leverage, she can't understand until she does something with leverage, like prying the lid off a paint can. Then she understood it. And I've always said in the things I've done to get things improved in the cattle industry, got to get suits out of the office and have them see stuff. Got to get the suits out of the office and have them see stuff. Otherwise, it's all an abstraction. I'll never forget a picture I saw in a business magazine of the CEO flying over a big power plant. And he looks down at it and goes, I'm in charge of that? You see, everything before was just a spreadsheet. Well, she knew it. She had very good sense. She's definitely a visual thinker. And she had a very good sense of how to stretch me. Not throw me in the deep end of the pool, but how to stretch me just slightly outside the comfort zone and give me choices. And I'm seeing way too many kids, way too overprotected, and not learning things like work skills, just basic skills. The amount of kids that have never gone shopping, I think it's just, I'm just horrified. I was shopping as a very little kid.
Okay, I think we have a question right here.
Okay?
Is there a place where you can get a squeezing machine?
Yeah, there's actually a company called the Therafin Corporation in Mokina, Illinois, that makes them. They're rather expensive. And they sell it under the name Hug Machine.
Could you make one yourself?
What?
Could you make one yourself?
Yep, there's drawings are online. If you type in squeeze machine, you'll probably find them. But they're not, you're going to need some real skill to make the pneumatics work. Okay, right here? Okay.
Yeah, hi, good morning. I had a question. In your book, you reference limitations on the DSM. For someone that's looking to get into therapy and counseling, what do you suggest in terms of diagnosing without making
I think we
teens
get
feel like
way
labeling?
too much into diagnosing. And the other thing that bothers me, I'm trained as a biological scientist. Nobody changes the diagnosis for tuberculosis. You either got it or you don't. And they keep changing the diagnosis for autism. See, it used to be you had to have speech delay. Then they added the Asperger's, socially awkward with no speech delay. And then in 2013, they merged it all together. I think that's a big mess because too often I'm seeing a fully verbal kid put into class with a whole bunch of nonverbal kids. I'm going to think in specific examples of stuff I don't want to see. See, the verbal thinker overgeneralizes. My kind of mind has too much detail. See, and then when Betsy and I work together on this book, we're getting just the right amount of detail.
Thank you, Dr. Grandin. It's an honor to be in the same room with you. Do you have any ideas? I am a mental health therapist, and I have parents who have children who are very bright and addicted to the video games, and the parent cannot turn off the Wi-Fi or the internet because they also need it for the schooling. The schoolwork is done on
Yeah.
the computers. And the children, rather than doing their schoolwork, will get on video games.
I can tell you what, this is where they're playing video game, you turn it off, and if they're doing schoolwork, you turn it back on, and then you lock the router in the trunk of the car because well, it won't work without the router. Or the router, the parent has the router, and they can't get online without that.
Thank you.
And then, of course, there's phones. Well, what we've got to do is, I've read some of the literature on this, and it's in my book, The Loving Push, I did with Deborah Moore. And the literature, the scientific literature is showing that the autistic kids have more of a tendency to get addicted to video games. And the problem is, I'm not seeing good outcomes. If they were getting fabulous jobs, I wouldn't be criticizing it. Video game tester's not a viable job option. You got too many volunteers for that. Not a viable job option. But too often, what I'm seeing, one mom will come up to me and says, well, how do I get them out of the bedroom playing video games? The other one's got them out working. And there's been some successful wean-offs with serious auto mechanics, like engine rebuilding. And they found that that was more interesting than video games. Yeah, you have to replace it with something else, and you would do it slowly.
Hi, Dr. Grandin. We were together 10 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long. For a child who is diagnosed not real young, at what point do you introduce autism to them?
Well, how well are they doing? If they're doing just fine, I wouldn't introduce it.
Okay.
Is he doing just fine?
Fairly fine, not
Well,
great.
you see, where the diagnosis is really helpful, I got a book, Different Not Less. I'm not sure if
I've
it's
got
in
that.
the bunch of books they're going to have today. And it's adults getting diagnosed later in life, all working. And the diagnosis gave them insight into relationships.
Right.
That's where the diagnosis is helpful. I'm seeing in fully verbal kids, too many kids being held back by the diagnosis, getting babied, and not
Okay.
learning skills like shopping.
Right.
But for a teenager and adult, you might want to look at the Unwritten Social Rules book or the Different Not Less book.
Okay. And do you know of any books that are geared to or maybe a 9 or 10-year-old to help them understand themselves?
Well, one of the problems I have is interrupting in conversations. I simply don't have the processing speed to avoid interrupting.
Okay.
That's a problem. And let's see, and then friends who shared interests. What's this kid good at?
He's very good at art. He's good at
How about get him in
reading.
an art class? That's something you can do with other kids.
Right. And he
Get
does
him in
have
there.
he does have some friends, special interest friends, but he does get bullied quite a bit in his classroom.
Well, I got bullied too, and in elementary school, I managed to avoid bullying because my third grade teacher explained to the other children that I had a disability that was not visible like a wheelchair. That's called peer-mediated intervention. And I've got a paper online, it's called How Horses Help the Teenager with Autism Make Friends and Learn How to Work. And it reviews some literature on peer-mediated intervention.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
okay.
managed to, for me, the bullying was all in high school.
Mhm.
And then the only places I was not bullied was like horses, electronics, and model rockets. For another kid, it might be band. I had one mom say to me, well, the kid's in band at the local high school. It's just fabulous.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, good morning. My question is about transitions. Is there anything that you would recommend aside from social stories that helps with transitions
okay, now
for
how
children?
old a kid? What
Five.
is-
5
what?
years old. 5 years old?
He's 5. You see, this is where I have to have a bit more information. So
Mm-hmm.
the transitioning would be like when it's time for dinner, for example?
It's not so much at school in the classroom having visuals. It's fine. It's going from one building to the next.
All right, now is he fully verbal?
He is verbal, can say 5 to 6 words in a sentence.
Okay, so he's pretty much fully verbal. Well, one of the things that might help is just a schedule. You see, one of the things that helped me to learn time was a big old school clock. It was about this big. And the second hand went around every 60 seconds, and then the minute hand would do a click. You could actually see it move. Each time the second hand went around, that would do another click. And I found that that was helpful. And I used to say things like the big hand is on the 12 and the little hand is on the 9. I'd say things like that. You know, maybe having some clock drawings for when it's time to, because sometimes that's easier than the digital.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And those kind of clocks, you can get them today in a battery-operated version. It still has a hand that moves like that.
Thank you.
I have a hard time dealing with change. How do I deal with it easier?
All right, what kind of change do you have a hard time? I see, that's a bit too vague. What kind of change do you have a hard time with?
Well, there's a certain routine that I usually have during the night. Usually I take my medication for OCD first, and then I brush my teeth, and then
Why do you have to change that?
well, because my parents want to eat their supper.
Okay, so you're when you should be going to bed, you still haven't eaten your supper?
Oh no, I already eat my supper. It's just that I think it's because my dad cooks dinner for the
Sometimes people get home at different times, and it makes the
Well,
schedule
sometimes,
change.
see, but then the thing is, you can say on the social story, you usually take your medication at this time, but dad has to work late at work, then it changes. And it's because he gets home late from work. You know, and then you have to change the time that you take the medication. And I find for me, and I still do this, the type of calendar that's been very helpful for me is you can print them out online where you got an entire month on a piece of paper. I hate a sequential calendar book. Hate them. I want to see the whole month. And then I have marked down like when the tests were and things like that. And sometimes it changes. You can have two contingencies. Regular time, dad gets home from work protocol. You know, something like that.
So, with so many of us being therapists and working with children with autism and special needs, at what age would you really like us to start working more on these transition and these adult skills rather than handwriting? If we're at what age do you think that we can start putting those skills maybe on the back burner?
Well, I want
and-
to start things with real little kids, like helping to set the table and taking the dishes out, and start that kind of stuff really young.
Hi, going back to your example of the person that got fired because he was given verbal rules. And I know you're more outspoken than a lot of autistics, but what would be your suggestion to have helped that person not to lose their job?
Well, what he should have done is said, you don't have to say you have autism, said, pilots need a checklist. I need a checklist of what I'm supposed to do. I would have just said that. And then I'll do a really good job for you.
Hi,
But
Dr.
instead, he built a bunch of fencing wrong, and the boss, see, it was a new boss. Worked at that company. See, this is where a lot of times the problem. A new boss comes in. The other thing I found is there's two kinds of bad bosses. The one everybody hates. And then there's the bad boss that just hates the people who are different. I've seen that over and over again. But if he had just said, I need to write it down, and I said, the pilots, it's not optional. Every single flight, they have to do the checklist. It's not optional for pilots. It's required by the FFA. And just say that. Let me just write down a few little bullet points of what you want me to do today.
Hi, Dr. Grandin. As someone with autism, how do you go about talking with other people who don't have it and kind of discussing that with them, talking about yourself?
Well, I find that most of my friends are through shared interests. I was on a plane a couple of weeks ago, sat next to a lady who, construction manager. We had a great flight talking about tilt-up construction problems and concrete forming. That's an example of a shared interest. You know, finding friends through shared interests is really good. And I find a lot of purely social chit-chat. I see people do this back and forth, really rapid chit-chat. They're having such a great time, I can't even follow it. See, the thing that's made my life worthwhile is having an interesting career. You know, if something I talk to you about in this meeting helps somebody to go out and get a good job and keep it, that makes me happy.
Hi, Dr. Grandin. Thank you so much for being here. I wonder if you have any advice or opinions about for parents when they find that the school, the administration, or the teachers are actually the bully that are trying to stuff your child into the autism box, as you
All right,
put
well,
it.
then you got a situation where you're going to go the legal route, and then they're going to hate your guts. Or can you figure out a way to change schools? Because the thing is, it's so site-specific. The school over another place, even in the same district, might be fine.
I found it interesting that Dr. Felton called us a desert here of services, which is very true, which is why we're so happy that this is taking place and that we have people like Dr. Connor here making a
that's good.
difference. But I guess just sort of for so many parents that are coming in with young children and are facing that first meeting, if you had sort of anything to share with them when they have that conference with the teacher for the first time, what you'd recommend.
Well, I want to get, you got little kids that aren't talking, you got to start doing early intervention by like now. The worst thing you could do with a 2-year-old's not talking is to do nothing for 2 years. Okay, I talked to some very low income areas where there's no services. I said, recruit some local grandmothers. You know, they can read a few books. And what I have found is some teachers have the ability to work with these kids. I call it the knack. And some don't. And you get working with this kid now. I'm talking like a 2 or 3-year-old, a real little kid. Okay, what's progress? More words, more skills, better turn taking, and the kid should like going to therapy. Then you've got an effective teacher. And sometimes that effective teacher might be a grandmother. But the worst thing you can do is to do nothing with really little kids. Just let them zone out on a phone all day. That's the worst thing you can do.
Okay, so I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Hello. I have a 12-year-old boy who is a verbal thinker. Any ideas of what a career path might be for him?
He's a verbal thinker, 12-year-old kid?
Yes.
One of the things that they can be really good is anything with specialized retail. like work in the phone store, and they would know every phone, every feature, help people pick out the right phone or the right printer. Or there's been some very good successes with selling cars, because they'll know every car and be able to tell you the pros and cons of it. That's specialized retail.
Thank you.
And some of the verbal thinkers are very, very good at that. You know, it could be something like shoes. You know, okay, there's a zillion kind of gym shoes out there. Help you pick the right ones. Okay, right there with a striped shirt. I can't hear you. You're going to have a mic. Okay.
You mentioned that your amygdala is 3 times larger.
Yeah, the fear center was bigger, yeah.
So, fear center. So I assume that gets triggered pretty quickly.
Well, the thing is, on the fear, I took medication. If you have a lot of anxiety, I'd recommend reading the chapter in Thinking in Pictures called Believer in Biochemistry. Another thing that happened when I went on the right med is my colitis attacks cleared up. Cleared right up.
But my question also is, if you are in a situation which is sometimes will happen and the fear or anxiety get triggered, what strategies or what...
Well, there's strategies you can use like mindfulness training, taking a deep breath. These are things you can do. You know, those are simple things that anybody can do.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think Barnes & Noble's open now, so I'll be going down to sign books.
Just to let everyone know, we're going downstairs. Dr. Grandin is going downstairs to sign books.
Quick announcement, everyone. Just remember the panel discussion will be starting at 11:30 in this room. So we look forward to seeing you at 11:30 for the panel discussion.
really helpful in coming.
Welcome back. Thank you, Alice.
Hear me? There I am. Thank you for that. Anyway, welcome back. Thank you for joining us again this afternoon. We will have another book signing after this, so we'll be together. We are very fortunate to be able to have Dr. Grandin's generous time with us here for a panel discussion. In addition to being very fortunate to have so many experts and passionate people within our community that are here to offer their insights to a number of questions that we have collected from different stakeholders that have informed the committee of what some of the most important questions and concerns that our community have, specifically focused on transition to adulthood for individuals with autism, what that looks like, and how we can help. So that will be the focus of our discussion today. I am Dr. Noel Balsamo, and I am the Assistant Professor of Special Education in the College of Education. I am also a board-certified behavior analyst. Prior to this, I had worked at the Center for Autism and Related Disability and had worked for a number of years in schools and had the pleasure of working with families across these ages. So I have the pleasure of being a moderator today with you. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists. So we know Dr. Temple Grandin from this morning, so thank you so much for joining us with your time this afternoon. With us today, we also have Dr. Ricci. Dr. Ricci is a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist diplomat of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. He specializes in anxiety, autism, and OCD. He serves as the Chief Medical Officer for Elite DNA Therapy Services since 2017. He participates on several nonprofit board of directors, including CARES Suicide Prevention and Lee County Drug Free Coalition, Autism Task Force, Lee County School Board, and CHADD, C-H-A-D-D. Dr. Ricci is a passionate mental health advocate, which is illustrated through his unrelenting support for many not-for-profit charitable organizations by serving on various boards of directors, and has a long history in serving many marginalized, underserved, and complex populations. He has helped implement and evaluate mental health programs for children and adolescents in the area, and in his many roles, Dr. Ricci is leading the way in advancing compassionate, compressive, patient-centered, integrative team-based care and innovative approaches to combating the mental health crisis in Southwest Florida. Can't say enough about that, so welcome. We're happy to have you.
Thank you.
We also have with us today Dr. Anne Marie Connor. Dr. Connor is Assistant Professor of Occupational Therapy in the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences, and she is our Student Director of the Community Autism Network here at FGCU. After 15 years of clinical experience as an OT, Dr. Connor transitioned to academia to research the needs of an underserved segment of the disability community, adolescents and young adults with autism and related neurodevelopmental disorders. While ample funding is provided and attention goes to research related to early ID, biological causes, and potential cures for autism, historically, only 1% to 2% of all federal research dollars have gone into understanding lifespan issues, such as employment and independent living, the topics that we are here to address today. We also have with us today, welcome Dr. Connor. We also have with us today Misty Polaro. Misty Polaro is a parent of 3 young men. Her 20-year-old son is on the spectrum and has recently left his extended transition program to pursue further education in holistic healing. Congratulations. Misty is her son's supported decision maker and is helping her son reach goals of owning his own business, living independently, and having his own family. She currently works for the Parent Support Network Project under Family Network of Disabilities, often referred to as FND, as the Parent Training Coordinator. With almost 3 decades of personal experience in special education and over a decade of professional experience, Misty strives to be more relatable to parents and caregivers, sharing the knowledge and lived experiences that she has gained. Thank you and welcome. We are grateful to have with us Kristen Wilhelm. Kristen Wilhelm is an autism navigator with the Pediatric Neurology and Developmental Medicine departments at Lee Health. And through this job, Kristen has been able to advocate, empower, and help connect families with resources in the community, as well as assist families in their transition journey. Kristen knows this journey firsthand as she's lived the transition stages with her 22-year-old son, who is a phenomenal music expert and has been diagnosed with autism. Kristen is actively involved with Project Transition Interagency Council through the Lee County School District and attends the annual Family Cafe on Disabilities in Orlando to stay current on topics related to autism and transition. Thank you so much. And last and certainly not least, we have Brad Carpel. Brad Carpel was born in Queens, New York City, where he lived until he was 15 years old and then moved to Southwest Florida with his family, and we're happy he did. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when he was in his late teens. After a couple of challenging years of college, Brad was able to obtain a degree in Health Information Management from Florida Southwestern State College and is currently working for Veterans Affairs. He found success in improving socializing and dating skills with speech therapy in his adult years. This helped to improve a broad range of communication and conventional skills in day-to-day life. Brad hopes to eventually move into his own place sometime later this year and has presented at Promising Pathways on a number of prior occasions, sometimes with the company of his family and sometimes alone, but always to a packed audience. We're very happy to have you back with us. Thank you to all our panelists for being here and our audience for joining us. We have a number of questions that I will, as moderator, pose. Panelists, please feel free to answer where you have insight to contribute in any order. There will not be a very structured expectation or order for responding. Okay, so let's begin. The first question I'm going to pose, because it is so broad and comprehensive in a few parts, mainly to make sure that we're able to get the different perspectives of different stakeholders. So it's a biggie. Okay. So what can individuals with autism do to promote successful transition to, first, those who are looking for transition to post-secondary training? So what can individuals with autism themselves do to help navigate a successful transition to post-secondary training?
I think I could start us off with that one, being the post-secondary educator on the panel here. One of the things I really encourage and see as a successful strategy, but a simple one, is to come visit. Don't make a choice about post-secondary education without coming in, talking to professors, talking to students, getting a lay of the land. Better yet, come talk to other students with autism in those programs and see what's made it successful for them. So I think, again, as Dr. Grandin spoke of so eloquently, kind of pushing past your comfort zone. So if you're feeling anxious or intimidated to come to someplace like FGCU, then that means you should come check it out. Let your anxiety be your guide. Know that people will be supportive. Community Autism Network can set up smaller tours for you, introduce you to other students and faculty in a more controlled setting, rather than kind of, the big mass campus tours, which could be kind of overwhelming for any of us. So push past your comfort zone, ask questions, and talk with other students who are in those programs.
Well, maybe I'll make a comment. One of the big problems I'm seeing as I travel around is I've seen people get a post-secondary degree and they've had no work experience of any kind. And this is why I was putting that slide up there with all the work experience. The sign painting business, then that morphed into the livestock handling business. You see it's a slow transition from the world of school to the world of work. I think that's important. You don't want to be just sort of jumping off a cliff, because work skills are very different. And this is the biggest problem I'm seeing, is not learning how to work. My mother helped set up the internships. One of the internships, for one summer, I was an aide for a severely autistic kid in a summer program. Mother set that up. The other one, I worked in a research lab, and my mother and another person at the college set it up that I'd have to rent a house with another lady, and she had a job that had nothing to do with the research lab. I was going to the research lab. You see, these were really important experiences. So we're going from a slow transition from the world of school to the world of work. I want to see the same thing in high school. 2 real jobs under that belt before they graduate, for the fully verbal ones. Absolutely, absolutely. Can't emphasize that enough. And we talked about avoiding all the multitasking horribleness and the long strings of verbal instruction or vague instruction, because those don't work. Because all the people I worked with professionally that owned welding companies and stuff like that, or they were an engineer, they had paper routes at age 11. See, that goes back to the church volunteer jobs. We've got to do something to replace the paper route, because those usually started at 11. That's what I would recommend. And this needs to start before you get to post-secondary school.
Yeah, the, yeah, the earlier that you get started on work experience, the better, because it takes a while to get acclimated to the work environment. Also, taking career tours of places you're interested in working. So before I went into health information management, I did a tour of the health information management facility at Gulf Coast Hospital.
Thank you.
As a parent, I wanted to just piggyback on what Doctor was saying about experience in work. I reached out to vocational rehabilitation for my son before school did and started that conversation at 16 years old. We also went past that because my son didn't feel comfortable working in the typical places that they wanted him to work in as far as retail or in hospitality. He felt more comfortable in a comic book store. So I went as the parent and found a place for him to go to work, and I started the process. Again, it's not always easy depending on where we live in our state. We understand we don't always have those resources, but knowing what's out there and starting at home, small work jobs at home in the community, only encouraging them to get the work experience. I agree.
Well, there's more in the communities than you'd think. I mean, I remember like a place that used to store some of my books in the same building, there was a custom motorcycle shop. Or another place I went into, they were remodeling an old plane. There's more stuff around than you would think, and people just don't see it.
I'll amplify this point and kind of pick up where others left off by saying, think about a concept called informational interviewing, right? So we think about interviewing as like a job interview, but you can also do what's called an informational interview, where you stop in at that motorcycle shop and you say, what's a good time for me to come talk to you about what you do? I'm interested in it. So it's a low stakes interview. It's not a job interview, but it's an opportunity for that young person to talk to someone who's working in the field. I'd say it would be ideal if you can do it in person. Schedule an appointment. Most people are really excited to talk about the work they do. People like to talk about themselves. So I've never heard of someone being turned away when you ask to, just take 15 minutes to show me and tell me about what you do. It's a great way to explore your interests.
Also, if they're having trouble finding a job, volunteering is a good way to get your toe in the door so that they know you and you learn valuable skills that way. So when you eventually could apply for a job there, they know your face, so you have a better shot at getting a job.
I know a lot of people have gotten jobs in museums doing that, where the volunteering led to a real job.
If I may say that in the 30 years that I've been working in this field, I learn from my patients and families all the time, and what I've learned is that you really have to continue forging the journey to create the services, the experiences that you need. We've done a great job, I think, with time in early interventions and really getting that all the therapies on for that very, very young child at the age of 1.5, 2, and so on. But we really are not doing early enough experiences and familiarity and really getting exposure for those children that become teens, that become adults. By the time we're realizing that they are ready for something else than just the educational route, they're not interested because they haven't had the exposure or the experience.
Yep.
So I think that families that come in to me and say, what is out there? I said, let's figure out what we can create out there. It really is something about, as a community, we continue to create these services or these experiences, and we can't do it alone, but we can't rely on an organization. We have to rely on families and community and other people that we meet. It could be neighbors, it could be working and volunteering. And the other thing I want to say is that the transition also creates increased anxiety for all teens going into adulthood. So some of this anxiety can be very profound in certain individuals on the spectrum. So I think that making sure that there is an early experience to really slowly get that exposure to decrease and desensitize, as Dr. Grandin had said, some of that anxiety.
Thank you, panelists. It sounds like we can't talk about transition to post-secondary training without talking about transition to employment and making those connections of how closely those things are connected, and also bringing all of our community stakeholders and recognize their roles. One, we started to touch on this a bit. We hear how parents and caregivers can support. We've heard a lot about that from some wonderful examples from Dr. Grandin this morning. What about those employers? Dr. Grandin reminded us there's 2 kinds of bad bosses, which is a fantastic one. I think many of us want to write down some that just nobody likes, and then some are just don't like a few or not liked by a few. What can employers do to help that transition for individuals with autism?
Well, I found a lot of things. Top management's got to get behind doing stuff. I found that with my livestock handling stuff too. If you had, what I have found is people want the thing more than they want the management. Now, one of the mistakes I made when I first started out, I thought I could build a self-managing cattle handling facility. That's ridiculous. I can't believe a lot of engineers make that mistake. Or you get some magical building or something that's going to fix everything. Management has to decide that, we're going to be doing things right. And I had a very interesting dinner one time with the people that ran the Walgreens program, not Walmart, but Walgreens warehouses having the computers converted. This was for people with more intellectual challenges so that they could work in the warehouse. And I asked, what percentage of the managers had a problem with this? It was about 20%. Basically, they had to get rid of the managers. I know that's not nice. And I found similar things with animal handling. Certain people shouldn't be handling animals. They like to be mean to them. You've got to get rid of them. But there were certain managers that just couldn't work with people that were different. But the top has to set the tone. I've also seen a very good program fall apart in a large corporation, something that was not tech, not the meat industry or anything like that, when their vice president level champion all of a sudden had a health issue and had to quit. And their program fell apart. What I found, a lot of things that work really well. You got somebody high up that is keeping it going.
Thank you. So what we haven't touched on yet in regards to the transition for a successful transition is how can all of us, those of us with autism, caregivers, providers, employers, how can we specifically support the transition in terms of independent living or supported living for those who would require some support in order to maximize the amount of independence that they can have in adulthood?
Well, one of the big problems I'm seeing is moms that can't let go at all. When I suggested their kid do something like buy some printer paper, or just, I was talking to one mom, She can't get up the guts to go pull into a gas station, and while she's pumping the gas, send the kid in to get something in the store right where you can see the shop. You know, I'm talking baby steps here. I'm not saying all parents do this, but there's a proportion of parents, they talk for the child, they come to meetings, and they talk for the child isn't doing anything for themselves. And I've had situations where I pushed a kid one time that he was 11 years old, fully verbal, he'd never used the men's room by himself. Well, I got that one fixed. And I talked to the mom afterwards, and she had a real hard time with that. And what I did is during lunch, I said, okay, explain the rules for guys. Guys don't talk in the bathrooms. Explain the rules. Then at the end of the meal, I said, okay, guy, time to use it. Mom froze, been using it ever since.
I think what Dr. Grandin's story really highlights is the importance of high outcome expectations. So we know if we set the bar low, people will meet that bar. We need to set the bar higher, and then we also need to build self-efficacy. And we build self-efficacy by having small successes over a long period of time. So I love Dr. Grandin's way of describing transition as a slow process.
But you're moving ahead
Yes.
step by step,
Incrementally.
incrementally. Now, there's some stuff where what was handled wrong with me is pounding away on algebra. That was kind of useless. And I think some of the stuff going on with the math, we're just screening out visual thinkers like me that were needed to build things like state-of-the-art chip-making machine, for example. And when it comes to living, algebra's not very important. Business math is. You know, I think we've got some major issues with the schools on some of this stuff. The other big mistake I see students make in college is they start to mess up in a class. They don't ask for help soon enough. When I failed my first math quiz, I went to the teacher. It wasn't called advocacy then. It was talk to Mr. Dion before I flunked out of the class, and he tutored me in his office. Then in graduate school, I messed up my first statistics quiz. I got help from a graduate student. In other words, I did something about it. It's the number one problem is students don't, I don't care about just the autistic students, all students, they let themselves crash and burn before they ask for help. Seen that over and over again.
One thing I think people have a hard time understanding is that it's okay to fail. Failure is not something to be afraid of, and I've noticed a lot of people on the spectrum and their families are afraid of their child or they themselves failing. But you learn a lot more from failure than you learn from success. That's one thing you don't need to fear.
I also feel as a parent helping build those self-determination skills for our children, which will lead to those self-advocacy skills. So when I'm working with my parents, as we share, sometimes parents have different parenting styles. So as a parent center and a parent that's lived it, that's something that I sit down with my parents, understanding what their parenting style is, introducing other parenting styles. Very generally, a lot of us are those helicopter parents with the first child to begin with. But then you add a disability onto that. And sometimes that can extend throughout their life. So understanding and taking a moment back and understanding what that is will help build those determination skills, with hopes will build those advocacy skills.
And I think it's also important to help encourage whatever independent skills we can for our kiddos. So even if they're not able to live out on their own, allow them to help out with chores however we can at home. Like Dr. Grandin had said earlier, having them set the table, having them clear the table, having them help, feed the dogs or feed the cats, and having them help out wherever they can to show those independent skills. That's just as important and as empowering for our young adults as it is for anybody. So to help them feel like they're part of the family, part of the contributing to the family, I think is so important.
Well, I was feeding the dog probably at about 8 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll amplify that point and say that truly from a developmental standpoint, the worst thing we can do for children, again, the worst thing we can do is to do for them what they can do for themselves.
Yeah.
So get them out there, let them make mistakes.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. That brings us to a question that we have begun to touch on here, but I think it's worth our time to elaborate in because it seems to be such an important one, and particularly for parents and caregivers who have been the first and the longest and the loudest advocates for their children. Perhaps there is a trust issue in terms of handing off some of that agency before they feel like their young adults have it themselves. So what can parents and caregivers do, number one, to promote self-efficacy and agency? You've said it. But I think it might be helpful to repeat this question in the terms of discrete skills. What are those skills? Self-determination, self-advocacy. What does that look and sound like if I'm a parent or a caregiver needing to teach these skills? Where do we start?
That's different for every parent because every one of our children's needs are different. So it's understanding what's available to us. And as a parent, we weren't diagnosed till later. We didn't have early interventions, and I didn't even know what was out there until I walked in as a volunteer to my agency, knowing that there are parents supporting parents, that self-advocacy comes from, we're our child's first example, their first role model. They're going to mimic the way our self-care, the way that we do our daily life. So if we continue to live our lives and show them that they are typical, healthy people that can live typical, healthy lives in a way that their life is going, their path is going to be, is the first example, is showing them that they're no different than everybody else. Everybody learns differently, and it's just understanding the way that we learn and then learning how to express it to others so then they are open to be able to communicate in the way that we need that. I can go on and on with that. I mean.
Yeah, what I was going to say is working with families, and again, I'm always learning from my families, is that every parent is different. We talked about different styles, but the majority of these parents that have navigated through adversity and trying to get resources for the parent, for their children, these are parents that really have a harder time letting go. And so trusting is an issue. I think parent-to-parent support is important, and I also think that involving the whole family, not just the parent. Sometimes the parents become so hovering over the kids, and some family members, extended family, may not truly understand. But I think that with the right support, that parents can look within themselves and say, okay, what is it that you're really afraid of? Because your role does change. You know, the transition for your child is also a transition for you. So your role as a parent is changing, and the support without enabling is so important. And so I think that understanding where the parents are coming from so that we can help the parent help their child become more independent.
And I'm sure the occupational therapists in the room will appreciate this. I'm going to give a laundry example. So I think a real practical way to build self-efficacy early is through chores. And the other side of that is to not to be afraid again, as Brad mentioned, to have it be a disaster. And to not micromanage it or criticize it, but just applaud effort. That's a way to build self-efficacy, self-determination. To be responsible for doing your laundry, and when you don't have that special shirt you need for track or the event you're doing, oh well, that's the consequence of what will you do? Maybe you'll wear a wrinkly, smelly shirt today, right? And you'll learn from that. So I'd say chores at home, and don't be afraid to let them fail. Don't go in and save the day. We learn some of our best lessons from our failures.
And I think to piggyback on that, it's to allow them to do it how they would do it. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. So if like my son loves folding clothes, well, is it always have to be centered and perfect, and this shirt side has to be the same as this? No, I mean, if that's how I want it, then I'll do it myself. But if he's doing it and it still goes in there and he did the job and he's proud of it, then sometimes we have to get past our own perfections and allow them to do it how they're doing it, and it's done and they did it and they're proud of it, and allow it to be with their work.
Well, when I was in high school, I made a Western parade outfit for a horse out of some old carriage harness. It wasn't that good, but it was mine, and I was really proud of it.
Thank you. We could do a job normalizing mistakes and failures. So often, at the same time as it's most overwhelming for our adults with autism as they're transitioning to independent life, that's when we see so many of the services drop off. So we know that transition is supposed to be and is a lot of effort put towards the transitional programming and school-based services, specifically the individualized education program, which by law is supposed to start at 16, some states 14, now here we know 12. We're learning we can't start the day before something's going to happen for those who may have some more barriers than are typically developing children where we can't start that. So the question here is, how can the team of professionals, including the parents that participate in the transition individual education program development, how can they make that time more successful?
Can I go first?
You sure
Please.
can, Ms. Speaker.
We've been navigating transition IEPs for 15 years. We have IEPs and we have a 504. So IEP, Individualized Education Plan, under IDEA, 504 under ADA, Civil Rights. So first of all, and I apologize, I have ADHD. Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Generally, we have these IEP teams.
Yes,
We have
transition.
it built in by law. We're having those meetings. How do we get better at it?
Bingo. First of all, we need to connect with what's known as Project 10 in our state. Project 10 is the transition specialist for the state of Florida. First of all, that's the primary place. They produce all the handbooks that we need as parents. Successful transition to middle school, they just produced this year with the new state law changing. They also have secondary transition roadmap, which is perfect because it tells the individual what needs to be done, it tells the school what needs to be done, and it gives us parents what needs to be done. But also, our resources now change. We need to start pulling supports in. Does our child want to go to college? Do they want to go get a certification? Do they want to work? Well, do we need to go voc rehab involved? Do we need to get in a program like the You Matter program that serves intellectual and cognitive delays? Or do we need to get a high university? And what is that going to look like? But as well, building in those employability skills early on. We don't talk enough about the 18 credit track that we have here in our state, career and technical certifications. As Doctor was saying earlier too, working sooner, having them in the IEP starting at the age of 14, 16, starting the process earlier, the conversations, doing checklists at home with our kids, inventory checklists, employment checklists, so then we can bring it to the team and they could have that voice of what they want to do, because we can't sit around making a decision for them. They're driving the car, we're their passengers, and we just need to make sure that they have all the resources to make their life path a success. And it's asking questions. Don't be afraid as a parent. Sometimes we feel that they know what's best for our child. They're the professionals who went to school. But at the end of the day, if we don't ask, we don't know. And if you do ask and they say that they can't do something, ask for that in writing, that they can't do that.
I think what I'm seeing in where I work is a lot of times the parents don't know what they don't know. So they don't know to ask questions about this, or they don't know to ask questions about that because they don't know what's out there. So it's very helpful for it to come from the schools, for it to come from the doctors, for it to come from all the providers. You know, starting at this age, this is what's here. And starting at this age, this is what's here. Like with our organization, we've created a transition plan to kind of give to our families. This is what happens every year. This is what to expect, and this is where you should be now. And I just think so many of our families, like we've met with so many families, and they just don't know. Like the kids are already 18, 19, and they didn't do this or they didn't do this. And it's not because it's nothing to do with them being good or bad parents. It's just they didn't know. And if you don't know to ask the questions, you're not going to ask the questions. So I just think everybody in the community needs to be out there, you know, giving this information, not just one organization. It has to be a whole community providing it.
If I may say, I get it. We have the IEP, and the focus is so much on building certain skills, especially skills that have to do with academic achievement. But early on, and Dr. Grandin was saying this, that you really need to tap into what is that talent, what is it that child really, really enjoys doing, and build on that. And we really don't use enough of the arts or outdoors or, really good old-fashioned experiences. And we're talking about autistic kids here, but I see it in all kids. There's a lack of curiosity in the world and really being interested in how things work. We need to instill in kids that early on. So, for example, I was talking yesterday to one of my families in another state, and he was telling me about his photography. He's really got into his photography. He's verbal, and he has tremendous slow processing. So he gets very frustrated in socializing. But with his photography, he's been recognized. Everybody sees his pictures. And he was telling me about Able Vision, which is a nonprofit for children that have disabilities to express themselves through photography. And so that's what I'm talking about, is really finding something that's really unique that child can really connect with, and they'll build from there. A lot of times in IEP, kids don't know what they want to do. That's normal. But if they have a lot of experiences, eventually they're going to get to something that they may want to know.
What?
This child that I was talking to yesterday was into photography, but before you know it, he was telling me about what he really wants to do is learn how to do one of those machineries, what is that? The
Claw machine?
hose, what are those, back hose?
Oh, well, the excavator.
Yeah, that's what he wants to do. That's it, really. So
Yeah.
only because he saw it and got on once, and they allowed him to play with it. So
Well, you see, but that's exposure. See, and the thing that worries me is some of these kids are getting so addicted to video games, not getting exposed to enough other things. You've got to get exposed to stuff in order to get interested. Another thing I want to talk about is the difference between an interest. Okay, an excavating machine would be an interest, where something that would be like a skill might be visual thinking, or mathematical thinking, or word thinking. That would be a skill. See, there's a difference between an interest, like a horse would be an interest, but my ability to draw horses would be a visual thinking skill. And I want to answer some of the questions that came up downstairs with the books on kinds of thinkers. There can be mixtures of the different kinds of thinkers. But what you don't find is a super good object visualizer like me and a super good mathematician in the same person. They're almost kind of opposite traits. You'll find some people in the middle with mixtures, but a genius in math and a genius in visual usually doesn't happen in the same person. There's actually some research to show that we'll be putting in the new book we're going to be doing on visual thinking.
I'd like to advocate, again, for life skills in transition. So often, we're looking at two scenarios. One is the individualized education plan, where maybe there's some life skills training that's a part of that. That's great. But then we have some students that maybe just have some accommodations and are otherwise enrolled in the general education curriculum. There are kids with average to above average IQ. The problem is when the educational environment doesn't give them opportunities to learn essential life skills. So I'm looking at Dr. Ann Tillman in the front row here, and we did some qualitative research with school administrators, teachers, counselors, transition support specialists. And what we found were stories that were heartbreaking. So students who were taking Algebra 1 and 2, but couldn't cross the street safely, didn't know how to use the press the walk signal and wait. So we have to be really looking at transition as not just academic.
Yes.
And we have to be thinking about those students who don't qualify for any services in the schools. They need our support too. So we need a more comprehensive approach. Some of the things that came out of our research, what parents, teachers, administrators, and counselors recommended was one consistent contact person throughout the transition process. So in the state of Florida, if we're starting transition now at age 12, can we appoint one point person so that family has a consistent, stable contact who gets to know the child, gets to know the family, and can inform that? That's a broad question and one that comes with, funding that would need to be behind it. But I challenge those of us working out in the schools to think about who can be that consistent point person.
Well, when I was a little kid, all the kids were taught, like, crossing the street, look both ways. That kind of stuff was just taught, when I was a child. You see, I think one of the reasons why that grandfather ended up having a job is that all this stuff was taught. Manners were taught in a much more structured way in the 50s. You'd have a sit-down meal. We weren't allowed to bring books or toys to the table. And we were taught to take turns in conversation. We were, we call it teachable moments. And kids aren't getting that today. I had a girl in my class a couple of semesters ago that never used a ruler to measure anything. We've got kids growing up not using tools. I just talked to one family downstairs where their 11-year-old was using Legos, but had never used a tool. I was using tools in second grade, not saws, but hammer, pliers, and screwdriver I was using in second grade, and taught how to use them safely.
Thank you. Can I just say something really quick? Yes. For my families that are here that might have an existing transition IEP currently, before high school, there was only a focus on five main areas: academics, communication, behavior. Once we hit high school, we have a whole other section that opens up: community experience, post-secondary living, independence life. Those areas, if they're checked no currently, when you go home and check those areas and see where they're checked, if you see those areas marked no currently and you feel that your child needs those areas, I would reach out to my IEP team or reach out to me, and I would help assist you with that, because those are those domains that we need to start thinking about to have successful transition into adulthood, and they need to be put in starting in high school.
Well, really, what we've been talking about, it should start before. And that's what we've been talking about. The exposure that you talk about really should start as children, not wait till they're in high school or middle school to start talking about experiences in the community.
The earlier start, the easier it is to acclimate to life.
I think another area that's really important is social skills, and Dr. Grandin is talking about the cultural shift we've experienced. We can speculate maybe part of that is our shift to more technologies, but we don't have as many formal social situations that kids are required to be in. And we know from the evidence that social skills training and paid employment before high school graduation are the two biggest predictors of employment and long-term independent living. So we have to be focusing on that, and we should not be afraid to be explicit about teaching social skills. So just what are the rules? What to do. I loved how you talked earlier about avoiding saying no all the time. I don't like that, but instead, here's how we could do it, and modeling that behavior.
I tell people that teaching social skills to someone with autism, they don't have the instinct. So it's like training somebody in a foreign country how to behave. Everything has to be explained.
And you can also get creative with that. I went to speech therapy to learn how to date. So a lot went into that: body language, how to transition topics. So you can get creative and find interesting and fun ways to learn new skills.
Well, I had to learn that, when I was in high school, I couldn't just keep talking about the same carnival ride over and over again. So I kind of learned, well, I can tell that story twice. And that's it. Because people find that boring, to talk on and on about the same carnival ride.
And it's okay to give that feedback that I've heard that story. Let's talk about something else. So don't be afraid to encourage that pro-social behavior. It might feel a little uncomfortable for you as a neurotypical, but I find that my friends with autism appreciate it if I'm just direct with them, direct and kind.
And don't be vague. Something like at work, like you're not a team player, that doesn't work. You might say, well, you called Joe stupid at the project meeting. That's, that's not okay. You see, but that's something specific. my very first construction job, I criticized some welding. I said, look, I'm pitching a doo-doo on it. And Harley, the engineer of the plant, brought me in. He says, you're going to have to apologize for that rude talk to Whitey, the welder. Made me go up to the cafeteria and do that. I didn't tell him the welding was wonderful, because it wasn't. But they also told me that Whitey was his employee, and that if I didn't like the welding, I should have come to him. You see, my mind works totally in specific examples. And then after I get enough of specific examples of things, then I kind of put them into categories on a spreadsheet. But he was a perfect job coach, an old 50-year-old plant engineer. And he did it in private, quietly.
So we're hearing broadening our understanding perhaps of the IAP. We have belittled over the years to such academic that we forget that we're also creating access to the social life of the school, which is to mirror the skills one needs to access the social life of the world, which is what we spend most of our time doing, whether it's
Well, when I got
employment or
bullied
not.
even in college, and the one thing that helped stop that, we had a big school-wide talent show, and I went in that and sung a silly song, but also made sets for it. So that was something through a shared interest. And I got along socially a lot better after I participated in this campus-wide show.
So to make a little bit of a shift towards getting the benefit of some lived experiences that we have here. As you transitioned into adulthood, did you notice a difference in the way you were treated as an adult as opposed to when you were a child on the spectrum? By family, by providers, by community?
Well, for me, I never disclosed. So when I was going to the cattle industry, my biggest problem was being a woman. 70s in the cattle industry, autism was a non-issue. So I had to make myself good at what I did. And the fact that the construction industry was full of a lot of undiagnosed autistic people, those were some of the people that helped me. Now look back on it. And now what's happening is those kids are playing video games in the basement instead of building stuff and patenting it. You're talking heavy-duty patents here. And equipment put in factories that actually worked and was used by somebody that would be labeled autistic today.
What advice can you give to young adults that are trying to look for employment but might be just too scared or they're just overwhelmed and do not know where to start?
Do a little bit at a time. When I was looking for jobs, I would set a goal for myself to put out at least 5 resumes a day. And as my uncle says, you have to swamp the battlefield. You can't just put out 1 resume and expect to get a job. You have to put out at least 30 resumes a week to be able to get a job. And for anxiety, exercise, meditation, mindfulness training, that kind of thing helps.
One thing we're working on here at FGCU is peer-mediated interventions to help all young people transition to work. So I'm looking at these wonderful students here, and they work together, students with autism and neurotypical students, to coach each other through the social skills needed in the workplace, and then those basic work readiness skills we all need, like which job should I apply for, and how do I develop a resume, and how about if we practice some mock interviews together so I'm not so nervous when I get out there doing the real thing. But I think the secret sauce in those intervention programs is that people like me are not the ones telling you what to do. It's your peers, right? So high school students of all types, college students of all types, they're all transitioning. So by giving them structured programming, my job is to do the research on building the curriculum, but then we let it go with the students, and the students make it happen.
Well, the other thing that can happen is you can get in with the wrong kids, and they get the autistic kid doing something bad that they shouldn't be doing.
So we've been teaching social skills pretty poorly for many, many years, but with heart and with good intentions. And often, perhaps those of us who are teaching it don't know what might be like the most ecologically valid. You know, sometimes we tell 4-year-olds to go introduce themselves, say your name, ask, and play, which they don't typically do naturally.
Well, you have to teach them to shake hands. That was done with me. Then we had these parties, when parents had parties, by the time he was 7, we had to be little hosts and hostesses, and we were taught to shake hands. We were just taught exactly how to do it. And we weren't allowed to use the guests' first names, even though we knew them. That was made really clear in the 50s. And my brother, he's not autistic, he despised those parties. But he admitted that it helped him get a job as a bank vice president because he was comfortable with talking to older men. He was definitely not autistic. But that was just what was done with kids in our neighborhood in the 50s. It was a standard thing we did. It's also something that doesn't cost anything.
Again, specific examples, role-playing, not being vague, that will definitely help.
I think it's important to teach the greetings, you know, the hellos, the goodbyes, the manners, the pleases, the thank yous, to not just walk by
Well,
somebody
like
without
the
saying,
dinner.
excuse me.
Sorry. I didn't mean to do it. Like at the dinner table, I'd reach across for the serving dish, and Mother would say, "Ask your sister to pass it."
Yeah,
See, that's an example of a teachable moment.
yeah. If a, you know, I would do that when I was teaching. If a student was trying to get by me and just like bump into me, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, let's think of how we could have done that better, and, you know, do like an excuse me and like role play and go through those moments. And I think teachable moments are so important at any age.
And I agree, role playing is more powerful than just saying what to do. You have to have a safe space to try it out, get some feedback.
From the lived experiences again. As you reflect on your own transitions into adulthood, is there something you could change or something you wish was different to create a smoother and more comfortable transition? What could we learn of any barrier perhaps that wasn't thought of?
For me as a parent going through the transition process with my son, it's that there wasn't one general area that I found all my information from. It was from this parent, and from this parent, and from this source, and from this source. And I was constantly back and forth, like, okay, I have to do this, but now I have to do this, now I have to do this. I wish there was one, like you said, like one person assigned to me kind of help me through it. Now that he's through the transition and has a support coordinator, it's fantastic because she helps us through the process. But up until then, it's like, okay, this person said to do this, and this person said to do this, but I still need to do this. It was hoping that I was catching every area of what I needed to do to help him through the process. I kind of felt like I was
What island
just trying
do I swim
just
to
trying
first?
to tread water to make sure I was getting all the
that.
services.
I agree with that.
It was a struggle.
And not for myself, I have to piggyback on that. Not knowing that every state has a parent training information center funded by the Federal Department of Education. So I moved from New Jersey 12 years ago. I had no idea there was one up there. So when I came down here and walked into the office, I went all these years without having that support, without having my parent village. So having a person specifically would be amazing. Now as a parent and a professional, I see just amazing how many supports and resources out there. But as a parent, I also know how hard it is to find them, that disconnect from them to us. Yes, I'm an agency and I can connect, but we can't reach every single person. So that's where we go into the environment and hope that you can pass on those words, that you have to find these supports, bring them to the schools, bring them to the districts, bring them to your doctors, because they don't even know what's out there all the time. And something new could be out that they could be referring a family to. I carry brochures in my car and stop at therapist's office and food pantries, and I just drop them off everywhere because we're everywhere.
I wish I would have had a peer mentor growing up, someone to relate to and say that, you know, it's okay to go slowly in college and not take 4 to 5 classes a semester, and that I would need to get work experience so that I get acclimated to the work environment early, because that was a challenge learning that later in life.
Thank you. My poor vision, can somebody just take a look at that clock and just, am I right that it's 12:25? 12:27, okay. So, thank you so much. We are coming to the end of the hour that we have allotted for our panel discussion. We recognize that this discussion could go on and on and on and on well, and we want to get as much as we can out of the panelists. The very good news is that many of our panelists are community providers, they're community experts. There was a desert, but it's a desert no more, and they are very well of the apps and are working really hard to let you know that they're here and how much they have to offer. And so many other vendors are available, so do take the time after you have your book signed with Dr. Grandin, another opportunity this afternoon to do so. And I don't think we've convinced Dr. Grandin to move here yet to Southwest Florida. But thank you so much to Dr. Grandin, thank to all of our panelists. And I do believe the books are for sale in the bookstore still. The bookstore is open, and I do believe the book signing is going to take place again downstairs in the bookstore, correct?
Yep.
So we can transition there. And
Excuse me, Brad. Can I ask you a question really quick, if you don't mind? You shared the panel discussion, and I just wanted to check. All the 20-year-olds on it. Yes, I'm coming right now. Yep, I'll follow you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.